The COVID-19 vaccines can be our chance to get back to our plans, to get back to each other, to life. But it's okay to have questions like, can the vaccines give you COVID-19? You cannot get COVID-19 from a vaccine. Find the latest information at getvaccineanswers.org.
As a community, we build empathy, curiosity, joy, and connection when we share stories with you. Welcome to Storytellers Project, part of the USA Today network.
Hi, I'm Michael Killian, Executive Editor of the Rochester, New York Democrat Chronicle, and your MC for tonight's New England and Atlantic Region Storytellers Project show. We so appreciate you taking a chance on live storytelling and sharing your evening with us. Tonight, we're joining Humana and 5 Americans from across the nation to create community. Since 2016, Storytellers Project has brought more than 100 shows each year to communities across the country, but we're online only still this year because while it feels unsafe to be together in theaters, it feels necessary to be together online. So we've handpicked incredible, inspiring storytellers to bring you My Family, My Culture. Please help me welcome our tellers from across the region. Kevin Israel of New Jersey, Lisa Condon of Delaware, Ann Gray of York, Pennsylvania, Teray Howell of Cincinnati, Ohio, and from my hometown of Rochester, Melanie Funchess. Tonight is not a TED Talk, not Toastmasters, not a how-to talk, nor an inspirational speech, an educational lecture, or a slideshow, and we won't sell you anything except maybe a newspaper subscription. This is storytelling, and storytelling is based on visiting. You open your heart and your mind, and you pay attention to a person you care about and want to feel closer to. So we invite you to do that tonight. Some of these storytellers will be polished and professional. Some will be casual and conversational. We ask you to receive all of them because that's how community change happens. We believe creating empathy and understanding is vital at all times, and especially in times of uncertainty. So let's get on with our show. Our first teller, Kevin Israel.
Last week, I deadlifted 405 pounds. I only bring that up because I was traditionally very small as a kid. I was a small, skinny kid in elementary school and middle school and even into high school. And as a kid, if you're small, you're an easy target to be picked on. And I was picked on a lot. To make it worse, my last name was Israel. And as everyone knows, bullies go for the low-hanging fruit. And there's no lower-hanging fruit than your last name. The only kid who had it worse than me was named Balls. Jim Balls got a lot worse than Kevin Israel, but I still took my share. Now, add on top of that, I was the only Jewish kid in school. And that made it really tough because I quickly became the go-to for all things Jewish. Whenever a Jewish holiday came up, I would be called on to talk about it. I was supposed to be the repository for all things Jewish. The problem was I wasn't brought up very religious, so I really didn't know anything about being Jewish. But after a while, I got tired of saying, I don't know. So I just started making stuff up. At one point, I told a group of kids that Jewish people could glow in the dark. So I apologize for that. Although I wish I could be there for when one of them actually asked a Jewish person to turn off the lights. That must have been pretty funny. So life moved on, and I got into high school, and I made a good group of friends. I was in the marching band, and which didn't really add to my social cachet, but I had a good group of friends. But I was still getting picked on a lot, and I was still a real small kid. So again, I was still an easy target, and it was never very easy for me. But around my junior year of high school, it was, I think, the spring of my junior year of high school, in my biology class, I sat between my two worst tormentors. And my mom always told me that I should just stand up for myself. If somebody's picking on you, if somebody's taking advantage of you, you need to stand up for yourself, which is always easy for the person to say who's not about to get punched in the face. But I never really took my mom's advice because I wasn't a fighter and I just wasn't a violent kid. And so I just never stood up for myself. But this one fateful day in biology class, the teacher had left early and I was sitting between these two kids who just constantly went after me ruthlessly. And I was getting up, getting ready to leave, trying to sneak out without too much harm. And one of them got in my way and said, "Hey, Israel, how was Passover? Did you bring any matzah?" And now I was actually just impressed that this kid even knew that Passover and matzah had anything to do with each other. I figured the moron didn't know anything about Passover. And then I realized that I actually had just said that out loud. And I stepped back and I was getting ready to get punched. And then his buddy was behind me and he whispered in my ear, "Yeah, kike, tell us about it." And I don't know what happened. Something about that word, something about years of just being picked on. And I just snapped. And I turned around and the kid must have seen the look in my eyes. And he went to step away from me and I grabbed him and I threw him. And he fell into one of the lab tables in our biology room. And he hit the corner of it and he just crumpled to the ground. And I immediately knew something very bad had just happened. But I was so worked up and so hyped up on adrenaline and so angry that I just left. And I went, it was the end of the day, and I went and I got right onto the bus and I went home. And I don't even remember the bus ride home. I was just so worked up. And I get home and I go into my house and I immediately see my mom. And my mom could see that I was upset. And I immediately tell her the story. I told her, this kid, he called me a kike and I threw him. And my mom said, "Well, good. You finally stood up for yourself." And I said, "Yeah, that doesn't really feel like that, though." And she goes, "Well, now they're going to stop picking on you." And I said, "Well, I'm about to get in a lot of trouble." And she said, "Well, then you're not going to school tomorrow. And I'm going to call the principal and we're going to take care of this." And I said, "Look, you can't do that because then I'm just going to get picked on more if I don't show up. I have to go at least back to school." So she said, "All right, but if you have any problems, tell them to call me." I said, "Okay." So the next day I went back to school and in homeroom at the start of every day, they had a call list. And the call list was all the kids who got in trouble the previous day and then would have to go to the principal's office to find out what their punishment was. And the list was always the same name of degenerate kids who got in trouble every day. And we all had them in school, just the kid. And they would just nod and just go down. I don't know how many kids spent every day in detention, but it always seemed like a lot. My name was never on the call list. I was a pretty good kid. And so that day, our homeroom teacher was going through the list and he gets to the eyes and he goes, "Kevin, Israel?" And he looks at me and I just nodded and he goes, "I don't even want to know what you could have done." But I got up and I left class and I went to go to the principal's office. And as I was walking down the stairwell, I passed my biology teacher and he looks at me and goes, "Kevin, what did you do to Ricky? He went to the hospital." And I said, "Well, he said something anti-Semitic." And I just saw in his face that he didn't know how to respond. And he goes, "Well, good luck." And I said, "Yeah." And I continued on down to the principal's office. And I get to the principal's office and I walk in and I knew the principal and my mom knew the principal. My mom was very involved in the school. We were very active in all the different school functions. So we all knew each other. And he sits me down and he looks and he goes, "Kevin, what happened? Ricky went to the hospital and you ruptured his spleen." And I said, "He called me a kike." And the minute I said that, and I don't know why, I just broke down crying and I couldn't stop crying. And he must have seen how broken up I was about this. And he goes, "Kevin, I understand it's a horrible thing to say, but you can't physically attack a kid." And this was a different time. This was in the mid 90s. So bullying didn't receive all the attention that it does today. And people weren't as sensitive about it. Everybody would just say, "Ignore it and it'll go away." And I just said, I couldn't anymore. And he goes, "Well, you should have come to us and we would have done something." And I said, "You wouldn't have done anything. Nothing would have changed for me. Like maybe he would have gotten detention, but I would have still kept getting picked on." And he said, "Kevin, you're going to have to be suspended for this. This is going to go on your permanent record." And I was like, "Oh no, my permanent record." And when you were in high school, your permanent record was the most important thing in your life. You thought your permanent record was going to stay with you to the day you died. Like that was going to affect your college and your future jobs and maybe what wife you got. Like I was sure that the permanent record was just going to be with me till the day I died. And I said, "You can't." I said, I'm never going to get into college. And he goes, "Kevin, there's nothing we can do. I'm going to have to call your mom." And the minute he said my mom, I looked up and I said, yeah, you know what? Give her a call. And he said, all right. So he reaches up and picks the phone up and dials a number. And he says, hello, Mrs. Israel. This is Principal. And he didn't even get his name out. And I heard my mom through the phone just start screaming. And I couldn't hear every word she was saying, but I did hear words like anti-Semitism and lawsuit and prosecution and newspaper. And she kept screaming. He didn't get to say a word. And finally, he put his hand over the receiver and he looked at me and he said, Kevin, maybe you should go wait outside. So I said, oh, I get it. I've been there. And I got up and I walked and I went outside and I closed the door and I sat in one of the chairs right outside his office. And for the next 5 minutes, I proceeded to listen him get yelled at like I had gotten yelled at so many times by my mom. And now I knew my mom had a set of lungs on her, but I didn't know she could scream so loud that I could hear her through a phone, across a room, and through a hardwood door. But I heard almost every word this lady said to this guy, and he got it good. And finally, I heard him hang up the phone, and I heard him say, Kevin, come back in here. So I came back in, and I sat down, and he said, look, Kevin, I talked to your mom, and I understand that it's a really difficult situation, and, people shouldn't be saying these kinds of things, and we're going to talk to Ricky's parents and come to some kind of agreement, and we're going to work out an in-school suspension for you that won't go on your permanent record, but, there's got to be some punishment. And he said, so go back to homeroom, and when Ricky gets back, we're going to figure it out. And as I walked back to my homeroom, I was like, oh my God, this isn't going on my permanent record. My mom saved me. Like, she saved my entire future. I was just stunned that this had all happened and that I wasn't going to be going to prison for this incident. And so we did get in-school suspension. And for the week after he got back, we had to spend every lunch together. It was just the two of us sitting at a lunch table. And for the first couple of days, it was awkward, but then we finally got to talking and we talked about the whole situation. And it turned out Ricky had no idea what he was saying to me. He didn't know what that word meant. He didn't know that it was one of the most terrible words used to subjugate an entire race of people where millions of people were killed. And he just didn't know what it meant. He didn't know the impact it was going to have on me. It was a word I think he said he had heard his father say, and he didn't know. It was just something he wanted to say that was going to upset me. He didn't know what it meant. And I told him, and he got it. And by the end of the week, we sort of come to an understanding. I wouldn't say we were friends, but we shook hands at the end of the week, and we never had a problem again after that. And to be honest, I never had a problem with anybody after that. I don't know if they were just afraid of Jews across the board after that, or if they thought I was some kind of psycho that could rupture spleens by looking at them. But whatever it was, nobody ever really bothered me again. And it was really all thanks to my mom, number one, telling me to stick up for myself, and then my mom also having my back during that really difficult day. And I tell this story because I was actually going to tell a different story. I was going to tell a story about the time my mom found my nudie magazines under my dresser. And that would have been a much funnier story. But I feel like in today's day and age, especially with everything going on in the world, we need to realize that when you're putting stuff up on social media, on Twitter and all the different platforms, we just say things and we don't think about the impact it's going to have on the other person on the other end of the screen. And our words do have impacts, and they always did. And today, more than ever, we need to be aware of the things we're saying. And I think if maybe we just put our laptops and our phones down and we sat down and talked to each other and had normal conversations, we'd probably come to more understandings like that. And I really hope that's what we can do. So maybe that's something to think about. And I promise next time I will tell the story about the time my mom found my nudie magazines under my dresser.
Kevin, thank you for bringing us back to your wonder years and for telling a story that ultimately, as you said at the end, is about empathy and understanding. Thank you very much. To the audience, please support and show your appreciation for the storytellers using the like button or the reactions button, please. Humana is sponsoring Storytellers Project shows nationally and now virtually because they believe that sharing stories and connecting as humans, online or in person, makes for healthier people and healthier communities. And we need these connections to each other and to health now more than ever. As COVID-19 vaccinations become available in communities across the country, Humana strongly encourages you to consider getting the vaccine and to discuss with your doctor what is best for your health. Visit humana.com for more about what they're doing each and every day to connect you to better health and your community. And now I'd like to introduce our second teller of the evening, Lisa Condon.
Thank you, Michael. I'm excited to be here. So imagine, if you will, a really beautiful day, August 2001. I was in Vermont, and for those of you that know Vermont, it's beautiful that time of year. Usually you only get about 4 weeks of really nice weather there, and this was one of those days. And I was looking out at Lake Champlain, and I was packing my car. And I had moved there several years prior, and I had made these amazing friends, and to the point that they really became family. You see, I grew up in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and my family was not very close. My parents raised me to be incredibly independent. And when I moved to Vermont, I had always wanted to move somewhere where I felt like a tourist every single day. And I did. And I loved it. And I loved these friends. So I'm surrounded by about 15 of them as I'm packing my trunk. And there's tears and there's champagne because I was leaving. I actually had taken another job. I'd been headhunted. And I was going down to the city, New York City, that is, to work. And I didn't know what was in front of me. I didn't know what was ahead of me. I just knew it was an adventure and it was a step in my career. So as I finished packing my car and I was driving away, I remember looking in the rearview mirror and thinking, wow, I'm really leaving some family behind, these friends who'd become family. But the excitement that was ahead of me was even more important to me at that moment in my life. I was in my 20s. So as I'm driving down, I was headed to my place where I had found this carriage house in northern New Jersey where I was going to live and commute into the city every day. Now, again, I didn't know that a commute would be, approximately an hour, hour and a half, depending on the 5-minute increment of when you left your house. So I'd been there about a week, week and a half. And what I learned in that week and a half as I was running this call center with 3 other managers is that the first thing you did when you got in the morning was figure out what you were going to have for lunch that day. Spent a lot of time looking at menus and a lot of time trying to figure out what I wanted to eat. And this morning, this particular Tuesday morning, was really no different than any other Tuesday or any other day of the week. So we're looking at menus. And in this call center, we had approximately 100 people. And like I mentioned, there were some other managers there. And the wall behind us was a full wall of windows. And all of a sudden, all the phones start ringing at once in this call center, which was really unusual, especially at this time in the morning because it was early on. And we realized something wasn't quite right when one of the women who was very much followed very methodically the way things were, rule follower, got up and left. She just left the room in tears. So we all kind of looked at each other, tried to figure out what was going on. And somehow we had heard that a plane had hit one of the towers. And when we turned and looked out the wall of windows, we actually had a view of the towers and we were able to actually see what was going on and smoke billowing. And I remember very clearly one of the women who had been around for a while, very vocal, and she screamed that the Pentagon had been hit because her daughter worked there. So she knew firsthand. And that's when we all knew something really wasn't right. For me, though, personally, when I knew something was really wrong was when I got a call from my brother. And as I mentioned, I grew up in a family where we were family, but we weren't very close. And so for my brother to call me and wonder, how close am I to all of this? I knew that something was really wrong. And so finally, we were able to leave. All of us were able to leave. And as you can imagine, when you witness something so horrific and you're trying to figure out what to do, and I was in a place that I did not have the friends that I'd had in Vermont that I had just left, and I did not have close family around. What do I do and where do I go? And so that evening, I made a very clear decision that I was leaving. But what was interesting for me is I actually decided to go back home to Lancaster County, where I was from. And I wanted to be with the family that raised me, that I hadn't lived near since the time I was 17 years old. And again, when you go through trauma like that, I think we all, decipher it differently and feel it differently. And I felt it very deeply. And so when I went home, I did a bout with anxiety and panic attacks and trying to figure out what to do. And I never really had open conversation with either of my parents prior to this. And so one day, after about a week and a half of being at home, I remember very clearly sitting on my father's porch. We were in these rocking lounge chairs on his porch, kind of the old ones where you would have them as beach chairs, but they rocked. We were drinking some iced tea, and I just broke down crying. And I was the most vulnerable I'd probably ever been in my life with my father, who I had never really been that close to since I had been maybe 2, 3, 4 years old. And I just told him how I was feeling, what I had gone through, seeing this trauma and navigating it and trying to figure out what the rest of my life looked like, because nothing seemed to matter at that point. It was starting over. And in talking with him and being that vulnerable and that authentic, in those moments, we went from being just father-daughter relationship and just being blood family to actually connecting on a really deep level as not only father and daughter, but adult to adult. And he shared with me in those moments that his life, he had had bouts with depression, with anxiety, with panic attacks. I had never known. He never showed that to me. And so he was able to really empathize with me, what he was going through and what he had gone through and what I was going through. And I can't tell you how that changed our relationship from that point on until the day he passed away. I told him everything. We talked through everything after that. And it made for such an amazing relationship, one that I never expected. So what we decided in those moments was that I really wanted to go back to where I had created this, what I call family. It's my friends who became my family, because that's where I was most motivated. I wanted to go back to Vermont, to a place where I was thriving and knew that I could continue to thrive. And his only caveat in making sure that I got there safely was that I stopped to see my grandmother before I left, and that was his mother. And so the next morning I stopped to see her, and then I left for Vermont. My car packed just as it had been when I had moved away from Vermont. That was the last time I saw my grandmother too. So somehow my dad was connected and he just knew. So I found myself driving the same path that I had left Vermont, driving back to Vermont. And when I got there, I was going to be a roommate with somebody I had worked with prior. And I showed up, and those same friends that were there to help pack my car, they were there to help unpack it. And the hugs and the tears were very different. It was about having me back, but also knowing the devastation that I had gone through. And what I learned through all of this, when you talk about your family and your culture, is you have your own family by blood, and the culture around that and the family you build with that is one thing. And the family you build with friends is something really different. And I was very lucky to have found them both through tragedy. So thank you for allowing me to share my story today.
Thank you, Lisa. A very moving story and about a tragic day in American history, but yet you found meaning and connection. And I think that means a lot to all of us. Thanks again. To the audience, please clap for our storytellers with the like button and reactions. Tonight's show is planned by Atlantic Region Opinion Editor Ed Forbes and produced by Asbury Park Press reporter Amanda Oglesby. Special thanks to Storytellers Night Marketing Manager Evan Roberts for his assistance. Among journalists who have helped coach our storytellers are Ed, myself, Asbury Park Press reporter Suzanne Cervenka, and Rochester Food and Drink reporter Tracy Schumacher. Our show benefits from the support of Gannett newsrooms, including the Asbury Park Press, the Bergen Record, the Rochester Democrat Chronicle, and the York Daily Record. You can support our work by liking and sharing this show, checking out our websites, app.com, northjersey.com, democratandchronicle.com, and ydr.com. Now I'd like to introduce our third storyteller of the evening, Anne Gray.
Many of my family stories are centered around photographs. My mother tells the story of when she and my dad took my sister on a picnic when she was not yet 2. Now, my dad was stationed in the Air Force in Great Falls, Montana, so their picnic was up in the mountains. My mom turns around, and there's the baby sitting on the edge of a cliff. Dad says it wasn't a cliff, there were more steps beneath her, and he was beneath her, taking her picture. Perfectly safe, he says. Later, they moved back to Michigan, into a neighborhood that was full of families with children, and I was born, the little nudist. Many times I've been told the story of how my dad gathered all the kids in the neighborhood together for a group photograph on our front porch. My mom swears I was fully dressed right before that photo was taken. But in the picture, there I am, buck naked. None of the other kids were paying any attention, though, because that was normal. You get used to a lot of things being the child of a photographer. Like at holidays, we often had to pose, sitting at a table laden with delicious food, so Dad could take a picture before we could eat. And the extra freezer in our garage was half full of film. Perfectly normal, right? Because he had been a professional photographer, my dad had the sort of camera you would expect a journalist to carry. It had manual focus and exposure and a flash element he could add to the top and a long telephoto lens that he could attach to the front. When he did that, it was huge. And it always took two hands to use because you had to rotate the thing on the front in order to focus it. Since he had been a professional photographer, when we were little, he used slide film. So it was never all that strange to me that we didn't have family photos around the house. What we had instead were slideshows. Even in the slideshows, though, I don't remember seeing any pictures of me when I was a baby. My dad had one photo of me as a baby in this little photo cube that he kept on his desk. But that was all I could remember. We didn't have any photos of my half-brothers either. They were from Dad's first marriage. Their mom and them had left for Iowa when I was only 2. So it was a big surprise to me when news came that they were coming for a visit. My sister was super excited, and I didn't remember who these people were at all. When they arrived, they were tall and blonde and old enough to drive. We walked to get ice cream together, and Dave showed off how high he could jump. We showed them how we did archery practice in the backyard. And then they were gone again. Reduced in my head to a photo of 2 smiling young men leaning against a cherry red convertible. As I grew up, my brothers started sending photographs of their kids and their family photos, most of which ended up on our refrigerator, stuck on with magnets. My grandma on my dad's side put her photos in actual frames and put them on the top of her piano. It was crowded with pictures, and every time we went to visit Grandma's house, I would look to see if the collection had changed. It wasn't until I was an adult that I realized there were no pictures of Grandpa on display at Grandma's house. My grandfather had died when I was 2.5. I never really knew him. I asked my dad about the no pictures, and he explained that Grandma and Grandpa had had a falling out at some point. But it was really weird to realize there was this gap in the family photo collection. Dad worked as an engineer, designing heart-lung machines. And his photography skills helped him to capture design requirements. I think I was about 12 when my mom made a new rule. No photos of open heart surgery at the dinner table. When Dad finally retired, 25 years After 25 years of working there, his company asked us to suggest a nice retirement gift. My sister had the perfect idea. A photo scanner that could take slides as well as prints. Dad loved it. He made himself a light table so that we could preview the slides, and we got started going through his huge collection. One summer, when my own daughter was a baby, I started scanning all of the family photographs from Montana, looking for that famous photo of my sister on a cliff. While I was working on that project, Dad says to me, "I finally processed the 50 rolls of film that were in the freezer." I look up at him. "The what?" Dad walks over to a side cabinet and takes out a bunch of long strips of uncut slide film, and with them, a bunch of family stories that I hadn't realized I was missing from a time of my life that I don't really remember. When Dad took those previously frozen strips of film out of the cabinet, the first thing I remember seeing was Grandpa. Now, I'd heard many stories about my grandfather, the tool and die maker who had encouraged my dad's interest in rocketry when he was a boy. But this was a completely different side of Grandpa. This was a photo of my grandfather holding me as a baby. And oh, I wish you could see the love that was on his face and on mine. It was wild and sweet. At any party all my life, if there was a baby present, my dad would end up holding it. Suddenly, I knew where he got that from. There were also pictures of my sister and brothers playing and being silly together, relaxed and joyful. My sisters and my visits to my grandma's house were not exactly like that. I suspected that it was my grandpa who made the difference. Later, I learned that Grandpa had taken the boys every Saturday while Dad was in Montana to give their mom a break, but also just to spend time with them. My brothers knew my grandpa well and loved him a lot. I tried to imagine how my life might have been different if I hadn't lost my grandpa to lymphoma, a form of cancer, when I was just a baby. I thought about how hard it must have been for my dad to return to his home state and have the whole family united for a few years, only all in 1 year to have the boys move away with their mom to Iowa and to lose his own father too young. It was no longer a mystery why that film was in the freezer.
And thank you. As you make clear through your story, family photographs are central to our understanding of our own lives and the people who we love and who love us. We really appreciate your sharing with us and with the audience. Again, to the audience, please clap for our storytellers with the like button and reactions. Now we will hear from one of our Humana heroes, agents in our region who do good while doing their jobs. Meet Ricky from York, Pennsylvania.
Hello, my name is Ricky Bugg Sr., and I'm a licensed Humana career field sales agent. My commitment to caring for the health of people is not something I do just to make a living, but because it's a calling from which I receive much joy. I recently called to check in on one of my Humana members. He was so glad to get my call and was excited to share with me that he had recently come home from the hospital, sick with both COVID and pneumonia. He became emotional, stating that at 88 years old, with pre-existing conditions, that he was a walking miracle. He thanked me for taking time to explain the details of his Mano plan from 2 years before, for staying in touch with him through all that time, and for making sure that he had access to great medical care. Now, whether calling my members for special occasions like birthdays, or just to talk to them after a medical visit or procedure, I am delighted to care for and serve our community.
Now I'd like to introduce our fourth storyteller of the night, Teray Howell.
So my first memory of moving from New York City, South Bronx to be specific, to Cincinnati is about the summer of 1990. Ninja Turtles were the biggest movie out. I had Ninja Turtle everything. My favorite was Michelangelo. It was just a good summer to be a kid, all things included. But as I got out and got to know more and more kids in the neighborhood, and more kids got to know me, I found I was just getting teased for anything. I mean, my accent, my complexion, my hair was long and braided, which wasn't in at the time. So I just really felt like I didn't fit in. I felt like I didn't belong. And after spending a lot of that summer telling my mom that, I just wish I could fit in. I wish people, would accept me. My mom told me something that stuck with me for a long time. Stuck with me for forever, actually. You're not made to fit in, she told me. You're made to stand out. And the trick to life is standing out for the right reasons. And that's something I took with me. But of course, being 4 years old, it was just something that took a little longer for me to develop. So over the years, I got thicker skin. I got a little more quick-witted as time went on. And that's when I also developed my love for music. I mean, anything that played, from songs in movies, songs on the radio, songs in video games. It didn't matter what it was. I was head over heels in love with music. And it just felt to me like this is where I belong. This is my fraternity. This is my home. These people get me. So I spent the next few summers writing songs in private, writing poetry, writing rap songs in private, and occasionally I would pop out with a trusted friend and tell him, hey, my dad brought home this mixtape. I heard this guy say this, and it would secretly be a song or a verse I wrote. And if they liked it, then I would say, hey, that was me. And if they didn't, I'd be like, yeah, I don't know what this guy's talking about. He's terrible. He should retire right then and there. But thankfully, over those summers, I got enough good responses that I was confident in my gift. I still kept it under wraps for about another summer until the 8th grade. There was a writing assignment where we had to write a poem basically about our life, either our neighborhood, our family, anything we wanted, just had to be about you. So I chose to write about growing up in my neighborhood. It was a bit of a social commentary piece. I grew up in a bit of a rough neighborhood, but I feel like I made the piece relatable. And I remember there was a line in the poem that said, I'm from where hoop dreams deflate and nobody graduates. And as a rapper specifically, there's a sound you hear, or a grunt of approval, if you will, that just that kind of means that they get where you're coming from. So that was my first major sign of acceptance. Now, mind you, this is coming from 20 of my peers in my English class. So it was a good feeling. So I, of course, now grinning from ear to ear, I powered through the piece. I get through it, and they all clap. So that was my first applause in the 8th grade. Again, 20, maybe 25 students, but you couldn't tell me it wasn't a sea of 100,000 people carrying me out of the stadium on their shoulders. It was an electrifying feeling. And for those who might have heard some of the verses I did before and didn't like it, it was kind of a, see, I told you I could do it type of thing. So riding that wave of excitement, I went home. I shared the poem with my mom, and at this time I had already recorded a few songs with my friends in secret in his dad's garage, and I shared my poem with her. She shared some of her poetry with me from a floppy disk, for those old enough to remember. And I mean, it was great poetry from the 70s, from when she was in high school. You could just kind of hear the social relevance, hear the message still to that day. And it just amazed me, and it kind of made me feel like this is where my roots are. This isn't just some random thing I can do. I have this talent that was handed down to me from somewhere. So again, riding that wave of encouragement from my mom, I decided to play her some of those early ridiculous rap records where I was just really trying to be anybody that was popular, sound like anything that I thought was cool at the time. And I can say, looking back now, it was ridiculous. And then me and my mother had another conversation that went a little bit to the tune of, she told me, you have a gift. The important thing to do in life now is to use that gift to say something worth hearing, something worth listening to, and something worth connecting to. And that's only going to come from your true self. So that, being a little older, stuck with me more firmly. So I started making more down to earth music, I would say, more honest music, more storytelling. I started singing more in my music. Still did it a little bit less than I would do the popular music. But then by the time I get to college at UC, I meet Jenny Faith Wright, who's also known as Black Butterfly. And she just taught me everything I needed to know about performing, how to sharpen my message to my specific fan base, how to craft my unique vision into something that's a grander scheme. And because of her work with me and our work with each other, I was able to open up for The Last Poets, Sheehan, a number of artists, which are my favorite poets. And it was just, to me, I felt like we kept, and when I say we, I mean my village that I had that accepted me for me. But I felt like we just kept riding our momentum upwards and upwards. Few years after that, I ended up moving to LA to get married. Had my daughter, and shortly after that, I linked up with my now business partner, Comp, from Baltimore. It turned out we were out in LA at the same time, and we just built a show up. It was started with both our ideas and 8 artists. We actually ended up performing for each other. It was a complete bust, but we took those same people, that same work ethic, and we built it up to an amazing show. And unfortunately, at the height of what I felt like was my emotional peak as far as riding that wave of success from my music, I ended up getting divorced, and I moved back to Cincinnati. Actually had to move back in with my mom, and it just felt like things didn't really go downhill, just kind of fell right off a cliff there. So I spent a lot of my time, as we say in my recording circle, just getting weird in front of my microphone, which is basically I'll cut the music on and I'll share some honest feelings and thoughts. And that's where songs like I Don't Want to Ride Your Wave came from, where stories like Little Boy Blue came from, songs like Witness came from. And again, in learning to trust the process, which is a big tip I got from my business partner, Comp. Anyone who knows him knows I describe him as my personal customer. He tells me I'm unstoppable. Nothing can stop me. All we have to do is put the vision out and work the system, and we can achieve anything. So, I always kept those things in the back of my mind: be authentic, be you, and share your story. And in doing that, which a lot of people don't know, but it took 2 years from the original conception of Witness to what it is today. And I can say through following the examples of the village I've built, I can now say I'm associated with Grammy-nominated guitarists and former Def Jam artists, and all of these things I never thought I would be able to say I was a part of. All starting from a little dark-skinned kid who never really fit in Cincinnati. And if I can leave anybody with any main message from this story, it's just like I've always been told, your family is either built or through those you're related to. It's up to you to utilize your village around you, and once they support you to be honestly yourself, the sky's the limit.
Teray, thank you for sharing your inspirational story, your journey to success. And if your first public applause came in the 8th grade, I'm asking the audience to please applaud for Teray's story through the like button or reactions. Tonight's 5th and final storyteller from Rochester, New York, Melanie Funches.
Okay, picture it, the Bronx, 1970s. When people usually hear the Bronx, they think Fort Apache or the Warriors or Escape from New York, right? That is not my Bronx. My Bronx is hot summer nights, piraguas and knishes with mustard, kids running and conga drums playing, and people playing Red Rover and Skelly and Red Light, Green Light. This is my Bronx. And in my Bronx, I had aunties, right? I had aunties. I had Auntie Star. I had Miss Brenda. I had Cookie and Dee Dee Mom. That was actually her name, Cookie and Dee Dee Mom. And I had Miss Roberta. And Miss Roberta lived on the 4th floor. And she made sure I never missed the ice cream truck, right? So she would wrap up the change inside the paper towel or inside a tissue, and she'd drop it. And I'd stand there and I'd catch it and I'd run for the ice cream truck. Miss Brenda and Miss Star made sure that my clothes were washed and my hair was done. And they all did this thing because my mother had schizophrenia and my mother wasn't well. But these women, the aunties, made sure that I was taken care of like every other kid. And it was great and it was beautiful. And they did it while keeping my mother's pride and dignity intact. So we did this went on for a number of years through my young childhood. And my father was in graduate school and he got into a doctoral program, and we moved to Syracuse. So we're in Syracuse for a couple of years and it's not going great. But one of the things that happened is I met a young man named Anthony. Now I'm like 10. Right. So we're boyfriend and girlfriend. You get the little paper. Are you my boyfriend? Check yes. Are you my girlfriend? Check yes, check no. This is how this goes. Right. And so we have this friendship, whatever, he pulls my hair. I punch him in the arm. Love. Right. So anyway, time goes on. Things are not going so well. My mother's not doing well. We end up back in New York City. And as my mother's condition degraded, I end up being homeless. I'm 12. I'm sleeping in the Port Authority. And I did not have the aunties that I had before, but I have these new aunties. And the time they call them ladies of the night. Today in 2021, they'd call them sex workers. And there were them and other people who lived down near the port, and they took care of me. They would say, "You don't belong here. We don't know what's going on, but you don't belong here. We're going to take care of you until we can figure out what to do with you because you don't belong here." And they did. They kept me safe. They kept me fed. They kept me clothed. They made sure I went to school. And they did all the things to take care of me until I got into this transitional housing. I spent a couple years on the streets and I ended up in transitional housing. And I'm in this transitional housing and I get a letter. Now, this is transitional housing. I had been homeless. I don't know why I get a letter, but I get a letter. I open it up and it's Anthony. And I'm like, how did he find me? But whatever, right? So I read the letter. It says, "Melanie, you've been on my mind so much. I want you to come and visit me. I now live in Rochester." He says, "Give me a call." So I said, okay. Now this is in the Stone Age before the age of cell phone. So you had this thing called a payphone, right? And I got a roll of quarters. To call Rochester was $2.65 for the first $2.25 for the first 5 minutes, 25 cents for each additional minute. So I'm putting the money in the phone, right? And I'm calling and he's like, "Melanie, how are you?" I'm like, "Hey, what's going on?" He said, "Do you want to come up to Rochester?" And I was like, okay, because I'm homeless, right? I'm living in a shelter. I'm like, I have nothing else to do. So I get all of my belongings in a leather backpack. I get on the bus. I come up to Rochester. So I'm in Rochester. I'm couch surfing with Anthony and his family. His mom works day and night, so she's not home. No one knows. And his sister, Michelle, says to me, "Melanie, I need you to go with me to this church. This guy, right? I like him. I want to get him, but I need you to be my wingman." I'm like, "All right, cool. We're going to go up to this church and we're going to be wingman." Yes, I went to church as a wingman. So we get into church and I listen to the preacher and I end up giving my life to Christ. Michelle was none too happy. So I'm in here, I'm going to the church, I'm starting to learn. And this lady comes up to me and she says, "God spoke to me and said, I'm to be your mother, you're to be my child." Now, at this point, I got homeless like 3 years, three plus years. And I looked at her like, "What you talking about, Willis?" And I was like, "Psst, whatever, right?" But around that same time, I met this young lady. Her name was Charlene. She directed the choir. We became like instantaneous best friends. We would go everywhere together. And it was good because I hadn't had a real friend in a really long time. And we went around. So one day she says, after choir rehearsal, she says, "Come with me by my house because I need to change clothes," right? I said, okay. So we went to the house. I sat on the couch. I must have closed my eyes. Now, this is a big thing because having been homeless for a few years, I was great for being able to go 2, 3, 4 days without sleeping because you couldn't sleep just anywhere, right? So I must have closed my eyes. I opened my eyes and I'm wrapped up in this cocoon and I'm looking around because it's like I'm swaddled and I can't move. And so I'm looking around and this old lady comes by with a wheelchair and like she's in the wheelchair, but she's pushing the wheelchair with her feet. And she stops and looks at me and she talks real slow. And she says, "Gal, you was some powerful tired. Vaughn, she's up." And she just goes away. So I'm like, what is this? Where am I? What's going on? And a guy comes by, right? He said, "Gal, you was some powerful tired. Vaughn, she's up." And he walks away. At this point, I'm freaking out, right? So I'm like, I'm trying to get out of this blanket, right? And I'm like, what's going on? Because I don't know. And I don't want to make too much noise because I don't know what's going on, right? So this lady comes out and she says, "Hey, you were some powerful tired." And now at this point, I'm like, what is going on? And I'm starting to freak out. And no, let me out of here. Let me out. And I'm trying to get out the blankets. I can't get out of these blankets, right? So I'm screaming, I'm hollering, I'm just going nuts. So they go and I'm hearing the woman call, but I'm not there because I'm not used to being in places where bad things could happen to me, right? So I'm there, and this girl comes running downstairs, and she says, "Melanie, calm down. It's me, it's me, it's me." And I looked at her and I said, "B, I don't know you." And I am so upset. Then the woman looks at the girl and says, "Take off your glasses." The girl takes off her glasses. It's Charlene, my friend. And I'm looking and I'm trying to figure out what was going on. And I begin to cry. I happen to look at the woman. The woman is the woman who told me that God spoke to her and told her to be my mother and for me to be her child. The woman and Charlene are mother and daughter. My mother, who became my mom, had never told Charlene what God had said to her. Charlene had said she was hanging out with a new friend, but had never told her mother that I was that friend. At this point, I am weeping, crying. When I closed my eyes, it was Saturday. When I opened my eyes, it was Monday. And from that point, I stayed with my mom. She did become my mom, and I did become her child. And they became my family. Charlene became my sister, and we were a family until my mother drew her last breath with me on her left and Charlene on her right. Family comes in all kinds of packages, all kinds of ways. The one common denominator of it all is love. If you have love, you have family. Don't judge, just love.
Melanie, thank you. A profound story. And as you said at the end, family comes in all sorts of packages and love is the common denominator. We really appreciate you sharing that with us and with the audience. This concludes our storytelling for the evening. We are greatly appreciative of each of our storytellers for sharing in such an effective manner with our audience. So thank you to Kevin Israel, to Lisa Condon, to Anne Gray, to Teray Howell, and to Melanie Funches. To the audience, we're grateful that you chose to share this past hour with us. We wish you a wonderful evening, and we hope that you'll join us again for future Storytellers Nights. Good night.
I'm very optimistic about what the ultimate impact of these vaccines will be. When you get a certain percentage of the population vaccinated, we can create an umbrella of herd immunity literally over the entire country. That will take several months to occur, but I feel confident that if we get a substantial proportion of the population vaccinated, that we can actually end this epidemic as we know it in this country.
The vaccine is important, and it's a protective measure. Wearing a mask is important also. Physical distancing of 6 feet is important.
The vaccine is a huge step forward, but it is not a silver bullet. And so after people receive the vaccine, we still need to do the simple things that we know work.